don't know, I got it through my county emails.
Okay. Yeah, mine's still not.
You'll notice we're on the opposite end of the table.
Starting at the head and I'm moving closer to the door. Jeff, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Peachy.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
So where do I need to ask that question?
You won't until you talk to call you tomorrow. He said. We did, okay. Yep. So you can just give me a call later. And
Okay.
Still doing embroidery,
Her sister does.
but she went through Delaware Sewing Center. Somebody wanted,
What do they want?
I don't know, I just know somebody who's looking for some embroidery to be done.
Probably be better to go to Susan, Actors Attic.
Susan Betts?
Yeah.
Okay, because that's where we have our stuff done.
Yeah.
But I didn't know if your wife was doing any of it.
Joelle will do it every now and then, but she's,
Okay,
they prefer it.
okay, because we go
All
through
my
Actors
stuff,
Attic for
my
everything.
pants and everything.
Okay.
goes to Susan.
All right, gotcha.
Good evening. Welcome to Kent County Levy Court's committee meetings for Tuesday, January 10th, 2023. This meeting is being held at 555 Bay Road, Dover, Delaware, in Levy Court Chambers, room 303. We do have 7 commissioners here and the county administrator. And before we go to the committee meetings, I'll turn it over to the county administrator to explain how those that wish to join us by WebEx can do so or by phone.
Thank you, Mr. President. In addition to being held live, as described by the President, it is also available via the internet through WebEx. Participants can either join by computer or by telephone throughout the course of the meeting. There will be opportunities for public comment from those attending in person or online at the designated times. For those joining us by phone, press *3, which will raise your electronic hand so our operator can identify you and bring you into the meeting. Pressing *6 will mute and unmute your line. If you're on a computer, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the hand and microphone icons, and we ask that you use those at the appropriate times. We also ask that all comments from guests be preceded by stating your name and address for the record. This meeting is being recorded and will follow all the rules of procedure adopted by Levy Court, as well as the Mason's Rules of Order. Mr. President, back to you.
Thank you. Before we proceed, as I stated before, we do have 7 commissioners present, so we do have a quorum. So at this time, I'll turn it over to the Administration Committee. Mr. Angel, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. If we can have Trudy come down, our acting director for personnel. The first item, actuary assumptions, and I believe Mr. Coelho will be joining in.
Yes, so commissioners, before we introduce our guests tonight, which are our actuaries, I did want to give you a little information about why you're here. So about 5 years ago, the county conducted an experience study of our pension plan. We also did one for the OPEB plan. And as a result of that, your actuaries will provide you some assumptions, which they'll review today with you. And at the end of this meeting, you'll be asked to make a decision. And you'll notice there's no motion on the memo, and that's because your pension review committee, which reviewed this with the actuaries back in November, could not make a recommendation on one issue. So in other words, I couldn't draft a motion because you're going to have to make that decision. It was a tie vote on whether or not to include COLAs for retirees in the assumptions. So that'll be a decision that at least we'll need some consensus on at the end of the presentation so that we can draft a motion up for the business meeting. Okay, so if you don't have any questions about that process, I would like to introduce our guests tonight, which are our actuaries from Milliman. The first is Scott Porter, and the other is Rebecca Ross. So I'll make sure I'm saying her name right. So, so as we start, I'll ask Scott to begin the presentation and welcome both of you to Kent County Levy Court. Scott?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we're happy to be here tonight with you tonight. This is our first year as actuaries for the plan. So as Alan mentioned, we're going to go through, I'll say, two parts to our presentation tonight. One is going to be on the results of the January 1, 2022 actuarial evaluation. So we'll go through that briefly, showing what the liabilities of the plan are, and then what the contribution requirements are for the plan. And then, as Alan mentioned, we're going to be talking about the experience study we conducted and proposed changes to the assumptions that are used to develop those liabilities and contributions. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so, briefly, as I mentioned, we're going to go through our agenda is to go through the January 1, 2022 pension valuation, going through a summary of those results, discussion of what the funding of the plan has been over the last several years. So we have a couple of slides on that, and then going through the proposed changes into certain actuarial assumptions, and then showing what the impact is or would be on the liability of the plan, and then what we call the actuarially determined contribution, the ADC, as we show here on the bottom of the slide, if the assumptions were implemented, had been implemented in the January 1, 2022 valuation. The assumptions would, those that are adopted would then apply in the 2023 and following valuations. Next slide, please. So this chart shows what the results of the January 1, 2022 valuation is, and the primary purpose is to determine what this actuarially determined contribution is for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2023, and so that's the right-hand column. And then we show as a comparison what the results were of the, based on the prior valuation that was conducted by the prior actuary. So as you can see here, the unfunded liability decreased from the that June 30, 2022 column to the June 30, 2023 column, from the 23.7 million to about 20.5 million, with the funded ratio then increasing to about 73.9%. We'll talk through in a couple slides a little bit about what the changes to the unfunded liability were, but one of the key changes is that we're reflecting in determining the contribution requirement for the 2023 fiscal year, we're reflecting the contribution that is or has now been made for the 2022 fiscal year, even though that happened after January 1, 2022. So that helped reduce the unfunded liability by reflecting that and increasing the funded ratio. In the middle section of the slide there, we go through the development of the actuarially determined contribution. So there's kind of like four components to it. One is what we call this normal cost component. So what's the value of benefits being provided to active employees, active members of the plan, and for the 2022 year. So what is that cost going to be? So that's that normal cost, or 1.17 million. We add in a provision for administrative expenses that are going to be paid out of the plan, so the 79,000. And then we add in an amortization payment of that unfunded liability. So paying that 20.477 million, that 20.5 million, paying that unfunded liability down over time. So the funding policy of the plan is to amortize the unfunded liability over 20 years. That policy was established 5 years ago. So on the liability that was established 5 years ago, there's 15 years remaining on that component of the liability, and then changes to the unfunded liability since then are being amortized over 20 years. So the sum of all those different layers of the unfunded liability make up the $2,050,000 that we show there. We then apply an interest adjustment to it to reflect the fact that the actual contribution is going to be made in fiscal year 2023, on average about 15 and a half months after the January 1, 2022 valuation date. As I think part of the payment is made in February, and then part of the payment is made in June. And so that's what comprises that actuarially determined contribution. And then we add in the portion of the contribution for employee contributions, how much is being collected by members to come up with the total contribution for the plan. So that total is $3.97 million, which is very, very similar to the contribution, plan contribution that was determined for fiscal year 2022. If there's any specific questions, feel free to ask.
Yes, we have a
them as
question.
go through.
Commissioner Sweeney?
Hey, Scott, it's Jody Sweeney. So the differences between 22 and 23, especially the actuarial value of assets and the funded ratio, those differences are fairly extreme. Does the differences, the increase in the actuarial value of assets, is that better position for us?
Yeah. So the actual value of assets increased, and part of that's increasing because of the contribution that was made, and part of it is when we were looking at the funding policy and the timing of the contributions, and determining the assets and liabilities as of January 1, 2022, one of the things we noticed was that the contribution to be made a few months after that was not being reflected in the valuation. So we wanted to make sure that we're reflecting the contribution for fiscal year 22 in those value of assets when we're determining the contribution requirement for fiscal year 23. So we want to make sure that we're not having you kind of pay that portion of the unfunded liability twice. So that was kind of the change that we made. So that's one reason why you're seeing the actual value of assets increase as much as you can see, much as you do from the 22 column to the 23 column.
So then that would equate to the funded ratio of 74% being considerably better than the 66.9%.
Exactly.
Okay, so the last question is, why has the expected employee contributions gone up so much from year to year?
Yeah, I think so. The plan changed effective January 1, 2020 for members hired after that date, that they would be contributing at 5% level. So that, and older members, members who were hired before that were contributing, I think, at the 1% level. So that change in membership is going to have an impact on the expected contributions to be received from the members from one year to the next.
Okay. And Mr. Coelho, there's been that many new employees that would impact it by that much?
Sure, and of course, pay rates have gone up, so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Sure.
Any further questions?
Yeah, there was 1, 3, and 5. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Okay, I think with that, we can go to the next slide. So on this slide, we show, a summary of what the total plan contributions have been since 2015. So from fiscal year 2015 to fiscal year 2023. So the blue bar shows the amounts that were calculated by the actuary. The green bar shows the amounts that have been contributed by the levy court into the plan. And so, you've been always contributing what's been required. We note in 2021 or fiscal year 2022 that the actual contributions are higher than what what we had just shown on the prior slide in terms of what the actuary had determined, as you made what I'll say is the sound funding decision to not decrease the contributions into the plan and to maintain the same level that was contributed in fiscal year 2021. The other thing that I would make of note is one of the reasons for the increase from fiscal year 2020 to fiscal year 2021. So going from the 3.4 million up to the 4.1 million, that was the first year that an assumption was put in place to reflect future cost of living adjustments being provided to retirees. So we're going to talk more about that. So the assumption that was put in place was a 1% assumption, and so that assumption is utilized in the 2022 valuation, and so that's one of the things that we are bringing to your attention in terms of what's the impact of making that assumption and providing the cost of living adjustments to the retirees. So we'll provide some more information on that. But that was one of the reasons why the contribution had increased during that period of time. Next slide, please. So, and this partially gets to your prior question in terms of how did the unfunded liability change from the beginning of year to the end of year. So the beginning of year being January 1, 21, and then the end of year being January 1, 2022. So showing how the liability increases with the benefits that are accrued for the year, what we call the normal cost, expenses, interest gets included, and then we reduce it by the amount of contributions that were made. And then you can see in that next section that receivable contribution that shows, so we're reflecting that in the valuation now. So that helped then reduce that unfunded liability. And then at the end that there was a loss to the plan of 1.8 million. If we move to the next slide. So the next slide shows kind of the funded ratio history from January 1, 2015 to January 1, 2022. The blue bars are the assets. The green bars are the liabilities. The yellow bars at the bottom reflect the unfunded liability. And then the gray line kind of shows the funded ratio. So you can see the unfunded liability pretty much peaked around the 2019-2020 and has now been reduced over the next couple of years to where we are today. Of course, as we look out and project out what things are going to be as of January 1, 2023, markets were certainly challenging in 2022. But within the methods that are used in the actuarial valuation, we only reflect 20% of that loss in 2023. So hopefully that'll be offset by some future gains and mitigate what the ultimate impact will be. But that'll be for, I'll say next year's presentation, but we wanted to just at least bring that to light here in terms of what the plans and the funded ratio have been for the last several years. Next slide, please. So then the next thing we really want to talk about are proposed changes to the actuarial assumptions based on the experience study. So, the purpose of the experience study is to reflect most recent plan experience as well as latest actuarial guidance. So there's a variety of different actuarial assumptions that are used to come up with the liabilities. So when members are expected to terminate, retire, become disabled, Those are all things that we would call demographic assumptions. And we're recommending relatively small changes to the existing assumptions that are used in the actuarial evaluation. Another obviously very important demographic assumption is related to the mortality tables or the life expectancies that are reflected in the valuation as benefits are paid, for the lifetime of the members. So what's being recommended is an update to the most recent tables published by the Society of Actuaries. The pension committee had, my understanding is, had adopted the table that reflects the most recent private sector plan experience. There's also the Society of Actuaries also produces tables related to public plan membership as well and what their experience is. We're continuing to review, I'll say, the tables that are produced by the Society of Actuaries to determine what's the most applicable table to this population, as your own experience is not credible enough to make a decision on which way to go. We're comfortable with the decision that the committee made in terms of using the most recent table published by the Society of Actuaries for the private sector. One item of note under these new versions of the tables that the Society produces, they have amount weighted, which is what we use for the pension plans, which effectively reflects that members with higher benefits would typically live longer than members with lower benefits. But we would use headcount weighted for the OPEB plan or for the retiree healthcare plan, as the liabilities of that plan, it's not regarded necessarily to the amount of your benefit. So that would probably result in a slightly lower liabilities for the OPEB plan. And we show in the next slide, we're going to show what the impact is of all these assumptions. On the economic side, oh, I'm sorry, not yet. I'll get to that in a second. On the economic assumptions, going to the second bullet point, I'll say first, related to the salary scale. So we actually looked at what the actual experience was of the members from 2017 through December 31st, 2021, reflecting kind of a change to the salary increase assumption based on that actual experience to a service-based table, relatively small changes to the ultimate salary increase assumption. And then, of course, the last two assumptions really coming down to the investment return assumption, so recommending a reduction in the investment return assumption. And so in a couple of slides, we'll provide some more detail on our analysis of the investment return assumption, but the committee is agreeing to a reduction from 7.25% to 6.75% for the pension plan. The OPEB trust is at 7%, since the OPEB trust is invested in a similar fashion as the state, because you're participating in the statewide OPEB trust, and they're using 7%, so we're comfortable with using the same assumption that the state uses for their plan. And then the last bullet point we have on here is on this, what we call the substantive plan provision. I noted it just a couple of slides ago in terms of incorporating that 1% assumption. So effectively it comes down to is how our future ad hoc cost of living assumptions, are they granted to the eligible retirees, and how should they be accounted for in the actual evaluation? So in a couple of slides, we provide some details on what the actual assumption or actual increases that have been granted to the retirees. I think we actually have it for over a 30-year period of time. So now if we can go to the next slide, please. So on this slide, we really show what the financial impact is of the proposed changes as if they were incorporated in the 2022 actual evaluation. So as I mentioned, we made some small tweaks to the demographic changes, the rates of termination, retirement, disability. Effectively, we made some adjustments to the retirement rates, reflecting that members can retire at 30 years of service. So there's a small increase in the accrued liability, a small increase in the change in the plan contribution. Changes to the salary scale reflecting more on a service-based method that people who are recently hired, we typically see higher salary increases for those who had been, working for the county for many years, but reflecting an increase in that ultimate salary increase assumption. So again, relatively small change in the accrued liability, a little larger change on the plan contribution. As the increase in that normal cost component, what's the increase in benefits for that upcoming year? The salary scale change has a little more of an impact on that. And so that's the reason for the slightly larger change. On the mortality table change, from the prior version of the mortality tables to the most recent versions that were produced by the Society of Actuaries were actually very similar in terms of the life expectancy calculations, and in fact slightly lower. And so it results in a slightly lower accrued liability, very minimal impact on the contribution. It's important to note that none of the tables, and there's also not only just what the mortality is of the membership today, but a projection of what that mortality is going to be in the future. None of that is reflecting any adjustments for COVID. At this point, we're not recommending any adjustments to the tables for really what potential long-term effects could be due to COVID. So the Society of Actuaries is still studying the issue to determine if there should be some sort of long-term impact be incorporated. But at this moment, we're not recommending any change to reflect that at this time. Of course, the reduction in the investment return assumption. So if we reduce the investment return assumption such that we're going to assume that the plan is going to earn less investment income in the future, then therefore higher contributions today. So that's the largest change in terms of the impact on the liability and the contribution requirement that's shown there. So this the subtotal, what we put there of these items would increase the liability by 5.75 million, increase the contribution by the 733,000 there. So the second line to the bottom shows the total results, what we say with the COLA. So the accrued liability would increase to 84.36 million, and the contribution requirement would increase to 4.7 million. In terms of the cost of living adjustment, when we first started the experience study process, 2020, no cost of living adjustment was provided in 2020. No cost of living adjustment was provided in 2021. So we understand now, of course, that 2% increase was provided to the eligible retirees in 2022. In a couple of slides, we're going to show what the actual increases have been on a historical basis, providing I'll say is an annual cost of living increase to retirees becomes a very expensive feature in pension plans. And so we show what would happen to the cost, the liabilities of the plan, and the cost of the plan if no further increases were granted to retirees, that their benefit that they have today would be the benefit that they would receive for their lifetime. And it doesn't mean that you cannot necessarily provide any increase sometime in the future. I think it's just a matter of if increases are provided annually, then within actuarial standards of practice, within governmental accounting standards, we're required to reflect it in the valuation to the extent that the extent that no automatic provision, the extent that the provision is not provided on an annual basis, then it opens up the flexibility in terms of how you might fund it for when you do grant any kind of cost of living adjustment. So if the assumption is eliminated so that the feature is eliminated going forward, the decrease in the liability would be roughly the 6.1 million that we show. The contribution would be reduced by about 715,000 there. And so the total results with the proposed assumption changes, including eliminating the cost of living adjustment, would put the liability and the contribution requirement at essentially the same levels they are as of January 1, 2022.
Just hold on, Scott. Commissioner Sweeney?
Thanks, Mr. Quayle. How many years have we given a COLA?
He has a great table he's going to show you in just a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit more about the investment return assumption. We want to go to that slide. Thank you. So on this slide, we show this is based on Milliman's June 30, 2022. Our capital market assumptions, our long-term assumptions, our 30-year assumptions. We take into account, your actual asset allocation for the pension plan in the different asset classes and mapped it to our capital market assumptions. And the key column to us is really that middle column there under the expected nominal. So it says annualized return geometric mean. Sorry for the statistical labeling there, but effectively that's kind of the column that shows what, based on our assumptions, what's the 50th percentile in terms of expected returns in the future. So going towards the bottom of that, you'll see it's at 6.42%. Again, this is based on the 2022 assumptions, capital market assumptions. Couple things of note, is our capital market assumptions, the Milliman's capital market assumptions had increased fairly significantly from 2021 to 2022. In fact, even from January 1, 22 to June 30, 2022. So this reflects the increases in those assumptions, in our capital market assumptions. One of the other things we do to kind of test Milliman's capital market assumptions is also look at what's called the Horizon Survey. Horizon collects capital market assumptions from investment consultants and actuarial firms. There might be about 30 to 35-ish different capital market assumptions that they include in their survey. When we mapped your policy to their 2022 survey, their 2022 assumptions, the median return was 6.1%. So even much lower, which was consistent with Milliman's, I'll say, January 1 assumptions. The Horizon Survey, when they collect the assumptions, they collect them as of January 1. So we really won't see the changes in those capital market assumptions until we get to the 2023 survey. So we had recommended an investment return assumption of the 6.5%. That's kind of consistent with that 6.42% there. We're certainly comfortable with an assumption at 6.75%, but are recommending that reduction from the 7.25% to the 6.75%. And then I guess the last slide, getting to your question in terms of the historical kind of cost of living adjustments that have been provided. If we can go to the next slide. So this is a table that Rebecca was able to put together going back to what cost of living changes have been granted to eligible retirees, really going back to 1992. So over the last, before 2022, over those last 5 years, we can see the 1% that was provided in 17, 18, and 19. That's kind of consistent with the assumption that was being used in the valuation. And then there was the 2 years of 0%. it's not the only 2-year period when there's been zeros. You can go back to 2010, 2011, and there were zeros. At that time, of course, that was probably coming off the Great Recession at that point, and cost for the pension plan were probably much higher because of the losses in the assets at that time. Before that, though, you can see that the increases granted were fairly significant in terms of 3%. One way to kind of look at the cost of living adjustments is if the investment return assumption is at 6.75%, and you're providing 1% to the retirees, effectively you're providing them 1% off of that investment return assumption. So effectively, for retirees and benefits in retirement, we're essentially using a discount rate of 5.75% to determine that liability for those people. So that's just one way of looking at it. As we provided on the cost page a couple slides ago, providing annual cost of living adjustments is a costly provision, but obviously it's your choice in terms of what the provisions are, and then if they are going to be provided on an ongoing basis, then we'd want to, I'll say, maintain that 1% assumption, and then just obviously evaluate it every so often to make sure that the assumption that's being used in the valuation is consistent with what the expectation is going to be granted.
Commissioner Jody has a question for you, Scott.
It's Jody Sweeney again. I'm confused. Sorry.
Sure.
So
What can I
that
help?
chart right there shows that in 2020 and 2021, we gave a 0% COLA increase to our retirees. Isn't our actuarial more impacted by the COLA that we give to the employees because of the increase in their salaries that will impact their retirement when they retire?
A significant portion of liability is attributable to retirees, so those who are already retired. And maybe Rebecca, if you can pull up the report and let us know what percentage. So for those who've already retired, then the salary increases are not going to have any impact, on their liability, their benefits. So the cost of living adjustment, does reflect not just, does impact the liabilities for the current retirees. For the current members, there's two parts to it. One is, you're correct, is that the salary increases you're providing is going to increase their benefit at retirement. And so that's certainly going to have an impact on what the liabilities, what the benefits are under the plan, and then what the liabilities are. And then we overlay on top of that is, when they retire, continual increases in that benefit equal to that 1% per year. And so that adds on an additional cost to the plan for those future retirees. Does that make sense?
It does. 14 years sitting here, I always assumed that our actuarial, all those totals that you gave us that were the valuation was taking into account if we went out of business right this minute and all of the retirement benefits that we had to pay, this is what the total would be for the rest of those people's actuarial lives. And I'm now you're saying it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, exactly. So the actual, there's a lot of different things that go into these actuarial liabilities, but one of them is just, it's effectively, if you had someone's benefit, if it's $3,000 per month when they retire, in another roughly 10 years, it's going to be more than 3,300, right? It'll be about 3,400 per month. So that continual increase or projected increase in their benefit adds that kind of additional liability. It becomes that, a relatively expensive feature into a pension plan.
So is there an alternative to giving COLAs every year to the retirees?
Yeah, so, some of our clients, they look at it at a 3 or, every 3 or every 5 years. There's different ways of providing cost of living adjustments. Sometimes they can be one-time payments. Sometimes it can be a 13th check. So there's different ways of looking at it. And then, so if you provide that every now and then, now the question becomes is, if you provide it every 3 years or every 5 years, does it become a substantive plan provision? And we get into the same conversation about having to incorporate into the plan, into the liabilities and the funding.
Right.
But it's all kind of facts and circumstances in terms of how it gets reflected. But there are different ways to provide the cost of living adjustments. And instead of funding, what really comes down to is, do you want to pre-fund future increases in benefits, which is what happens when we include it in the liabilities and the contribution requirement now, or at the time you grant it, you pay for it over a 3 to a 5 year period of time. So you grant a COLA, you're going to grant a one-time, percent change. Inflation changed in the last 5 years by 10%, and so we're going to provide 50% of that that change in the COLA and increase their benefits, and then we're going to pay for that over, let's say, a 10-year period of time, a much shorter period of time. So there's different ways of how you might fund it, how you might go about providing those increases. If the intention is to continually provide them, then we want to make sure that we're reflecting it in the liabilities and in the contribution requirements.
I get that, but pre-funding it also means we're assuming we're going to have an increase in revenue over expenses, that we have the money to do that, which we don't.
Right, exactly.
All right, thank
And
you.
Scott, in answer to your question, it was about 42% of the liability is attributable to the retirees.
Okay, so roughly 40%, 42%. Okay.
President Pepper, then Commissioner Scott.
Yeah, I have an in-house question here for Trudy or Alan. How many folks do we have right now that are collecting a pension?
288, about 159 are active. They retired from active service, and those are currently the only folks you're giving a COLA to now, where those other numbers, you actually gave it across the board to all recipients. But 288 is like one of the higher numbers we've ever had of retirees. So,
Okay, I was just trying to put it in perspective.
Commissioner Scott.
Yes. Scott, I have a question. If I'm looking at this table, right, over the last 30 years, you're averaging about 1.6% a year. You're talking about taking 1% of that away, correct?
Did you catch that, Scott?
Yeah, I did hear. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, right now the assumption is that future increases will average 1%. So, I think the prior actuary made that determination, might have been based on prior conversations with the commissioners. And I think we look at 17, 18, and 19, and it was roughly, it was like 1%. So I think that might have been part of where that 1% was. You look back at the table, I think it's a really interesting table, especially, you go through it. But in terms of what increases were in the past, and you look at the late 90s, 3% increases was relatively common at that point with a lot of pension plans, and assets were doing very well. So kind of seeing that, usually I would say we've seen after 2001, we would see, kind of a reduction, and maybe you see a little bit where it went from 3 to 2 to 1.5, but you continually provided those, those increases to them. I mean, one thing to note is, as the plan matures and life expectancies get longer, then the number of retirees who are receiving the COLAs kind of increase over time. So it gets more expensive just as the plan continually matures.
Sure. Would we be better off not to have a more consistent basis instead of all over the board?
I mean, I'm not sure if that's directed to me, but
Sure, it
I
is.
think at the
Yes, it's absolutely directed to you, yes.
So, I'm not looking to, like our job as actuaries is not to kind of make policy, right? Our jobs is to kind of determine based on the policy you have is to come up with what we think the right liability and contributions are to support those policies. But from my perspective of, other clients and what we see, and they provide assumptions is, yeah, if the intent is to continually provide cost of living increases, then pre-funding it, having including the liabilities makes the most sense to me. To the extent you can continually be consistent with that, and if the assumption is 1% and you continually grant 1%, kind of meeting that requirement, then that makes sense to me. The fact that this past year, inflation shot up on everybody this past year. So the fact that this 1 year you made an increase to go, to 2%, that still is reasonable to me, assuming going forward you would kind of come back down to, that ultimate assumption of 1%. So again, if the intent is to continually provide the increases, then we agree with maintaining the assumption, maintaining the pre-funding nature of it. Like I said, when we first started the experience study, we were starting this in April, May timeframe. We saw 2 zeros. Inflation just started to increase. So it was kind of a different world when we first started. And I think that echoes Alan's comments to the very beginning of, hey, we're not quite sure how we want to move forward with this because it is a costly provision, but ultimately it comes down to the decisions that you make.
Commissioner Sweeney?
Thanks, Commissioner Angel. So Scott, one more question. You mentioned that that you didn't even take into account any COVID issues. However, this past year, the expected lifespan of a human decreased for probably the first time in 30 years. Is that not worth taking a look at?
Yeah, and it kind of comes down to is when you read those stories, what they base it on. And so, at this point, it's really a wait and see. So it really comes down to is the life expectancy for your particular population. Is that drastically different, in 2023 than what it was in 2019? And for many plans, even those who were kind of impacted by COVID a little greater, those individuals are kind of out of the valuation process. So it really comes down to is for the people who will be in the valuation in 2023 and later, what is their life expectancy going to be? So at this point, we're not recommending any changes. We haven't really made any changes with our clients, which is fairly consistent within the industry. But the Society of Actuaries has been looking at it and starting to figure out if some, kind of long-term adjustment should start being included. But so far to date really hasn't come to a conclusion on that or a recommendation on that.
So maybe next year.
Yeah, I mean, it could be next year, it could be the year after, because once when I'll say all this data kind of starts to come through, because it takes a couple of years for the data to, I'll say, kind of come through in terms of how it's analyzed and incorporated into the tables.
Thanks.
Commissioner Hall?
Thanks. Scott, for the out years, one of the early discussion points was that we have employees, I think, still on the payroll paying 1%, and then we have some paying 3% and some paying 5%. And then as time goes along and as older employees retire, we're going to get to a point where there's just a net larger contribution coming out of the employee payroll. And is that accounted for? And where does that show up?
Yeah, if we actually go back, if we can go back to maybe slide 3. So there, if you look at that, what we call that actually determined contribution, so the employer portion of the total plan contribution, you can see that was reduced from 3.7 to 3.6 million. So that's where you're seeing it. And then we're adding in the employee contribution. So the total plan contribution is looking very similar from one year to the next, but the presumably you'd be collecting that much more from employees, and then therefore the amounts that are being from your funds are being decreased.
Okay, thanks.
Scott, Al Angel. Our system, since I've been here, we've gone from a 5-year retirement to a 8-year retirement to however many years somebody wants to retire. Then we have the 1%, 3%, and 5% pay-in. Over time, is that figured into this whole equation also?
Yes, but minimally. So the changes, those changes get reflected as those, kind of newer employees are hired. So the valuation reflects a snapshot of the data, of the membership in the plan as of January 1, 2022. So to the extent that there are the kind of the newer employees with the paying the higher contributions, with the longer vesting period, those changes, then it's only for those who are actually hired, and they have their liabilities are the smallest, relative to the others because they have the least amount of service. So as you progress through time, and the plan matures a little bit, or continually matures, then you'll start to see as new hires come in, those costs will come down, reflective of kind of year over year, based on those changes you made, if that makes sense.
Okay, I know about 5 years ago, it was recommended that we don't do COLAs. I think we've done, 2 or 3 in the 5 years, Alan?
Yes. And that's why you notice that big bump was the actuary is required by the Governmental Standards Board to accept reality and fund it. So currently you fund an average 1% COLA for your retirees. So the reason this contribution goes up is not because of COLA. It goes up because the discount rate or the interest rate is going from 7.25 down to 6.75. I mean, that's where the impact really is. Now, if you want to offset that impact, then you stop giving COLAs. But if you continue on average to give a COLA, the actuary will be required to put it in just as they did, despite you have an assumption of no COLA back in, I think it was 2000 on that chart.
So that gets to my next question. Is it better to give a cash bonus to retirees instead of a COLA? Would that help offset our issue right now to try and get on track?
No, because you're earning interest on the money that's there.
And eventually you start giving cash bonuses, that then has to be calculated in. Oh, you're giving a $500 bonus every year. We got to calculate that in.
But it might still be cheaper than the outlay. You don't know till it's figured in. That's not perpetuated on each year, piggybacking then. So you just be given as needed, when needed. The reward, basically. Because, I mean, let's face it, cost of living is going to go up. It's always going to go up. We know that. So But, and I believe, Alan, we were, and Trudy, when we had our meeting, and Susan, this year, if we don't give a COLA, it's still going to cost us about $700,000. And if we do give it, it's still going to cost us $700,000. Is that correct?
Yes, indirectly, yes. I mean,
So
it's
either-
still gonna be considered part of the budget.
So
Yeah, I mean,
either
there's-
way, it's going to cost us. So I don't have a problem giving it this year to somebody that needs it because it's going to cost you either, it's going to be a balance. It's going to be a wash. See what I'm saying? It's going to cost you either way.
This is for future, what you're deciding now.
Yeah, and I would say is when we do the valuation next year, we would say, okay, we assume that there was a 1% increase, 2% was provided. This produced an actuarial loss to the plan because more was provided than what was expected. Just as there was a gain to the plan because 0% was provided versus the 1. So that's how, and so that gain or loss kind of impacts that, the liability of the plan and then the future contribution, requirements. But yeah, like as I mentioned earlier, there are different ways of doing those cost of living adjustments.
Okay, any other questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Does anybody know what percentage?
Any of the mic?
Scott, does anybody have it down what percentage of the retirees are paying 1%, what percentage is paying 3%, and what percentage is paying 5%? Because I just can't quite get over the concept that it ain't going to be long where everybody's going to be putting in 5%.
Don't we have a lot of people eligible for retirement in the next year or
Retirees
so?
don't pay into that.
Okay.
Retirees don't pay into the retirement rate.
No.
Alan?
But while they're employed, they do.
While they're here, they do.
Yes, and that's my whole position on it.
So the contribution is proposed to go, well, it is basically $4 million, of which employees are putting in not even 10%, Susan. So as that goes up to 5%, I mean, it will certainly increase a bit. But you're probably still always looking at the county share being perhaps 90, 92%.
If everybody was at 5%.
Yes.
But then at the same time, everything's still else is going to go up.
Right.
It will get a little bit different. You will see some variance there. You'll see it every year.
Correct. You're going to see some change as your interest rates change, et cetera. I mean, it's just like a stock or a market or whatever. It's going to change as well. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Mr. Quayle.
So I think the purpose of this conversation is to determine for the actuary what you want the assumptions to be when they do the valuation as of January 1st of this year. And remember, that's going to determine your contribution for FY24. Right now, the Pitch Review Committee has recommended everything except for the COLA. They did not make a recommendation. COLA is currently funded. So if you want your contribution, all things being the same, and this year, it would have been about the same. Keep in mind, assets went down quite a bit in the last year, so that smoothing effect is going to be applied to that going forward. And certainly gave everyone basically a 6% pay increase. They don't estimate that much when they're doing the valuation. So there's going to be an increase either way. So it will, whether you fund it, the COLA, or decide to give no COLA, which was a decision made 5 years ago, but ultimately GASB forced you to pay that. I think it was $600,000 was about what it went up. And that was a comment, an observation made each year during the budget process when this decision was being made. So it will be at least $4 million next year, perhaps more just because of performance. But if you would like to minimize that increase, then you would want an assumption of no COLA, which is really the question that's before you. If you want to accept the recommendations of the Pension Review Committee, is do you want to assume a 1% COLA, or do you not want to assume a 1% COLA? I think that's the consensus we're looking for, so we can draft up the motion for you for the business meeting.
Alan, was the $4 million without the employee contribution, was that the bottom line?
If that's the bottom line.
President Pepper.
I think when we make that decision, we need to consider how much that plays into hiring and retention. So if someone comes here and they say, hey, we're not going to get any increases in our pension, why stay here? Then the astute person that we hire may look further ahead, especially if they're in midlife or whatever. They're going to consider whether or not we give increases in our pension. So I don't want that to go by without being considered in your decisions here tonight. So, thank you.
Commissioner Hall.
I agree with President Pepper. Just got almost a 9% increase in my military retirement. Social Security recipients got a pretty good lift. And the story has always been you don't get paid very well to be a government employee because of the benefits, right? So if we erode the benefits, if we paint a picture where we're going to erode the retirement benefits, paramedics, critical services, people looking at us, people looking at other places to work. Right now, it's a buyer's market for employees out there looking for work. I don't think we want to create that picture where we look like we're too cheap to pay. So I think 1% is fair.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have to agree with both of the last two. I think your employees, if they're treated right, they can be your biggest advocate, whether they're still employed or whether they're retired. And I think it's something that we really need to keep in mind. And I don't think, I know 1% represents a lot of money at the end of the day, but what's it worth to us? I guess is my question.
Personally, my view is when any job I've ever taken in my lifetime, I wasn't interested in retirement or COLAs. I was interested in retirement, having something, yes, but never a COLA. It was always, how much money am I going to be able to pay my family, my bills, my food, my utilities, and how much I can save. I've never once thought about a COLA as part of my retirement. Not that I'm saying it can't happen because we're having it now, but retention-wise, you get people up front, you pay them well, and you offer the benefit package to offset some of the things that we can't pay them. So that's my view on that. Anybody else? Ms. Maston?
I think I've said before, I will never support a COLA for anybody because I think you're paid a fair salary and you're treated well. Learn to save your money, live within your means. You shouldn't be required to worry about having a COLA, how much you get or how much you don't get. However, I do understand, because I've been educated by some employees, that there are some employees here that are at the top of their ranges of their jobs, even with a new pay study, and without a cost of living increase, they worked a year and they don't get anything. And I understand in the real world, when you work outside of government, when you go to certain jobs, you're going to reach the top of that job. So your options are to get new skills in order to improve your value, or you look elsewhere for a job. However, today's world is certainly not anything like I worked for 40 years. To get a good employee that shows up every day to work, does a good job, is conscientious, that's probably an act of Congress in today's world. So I understand what President Pepper is saying, in order for us to retain employees and to make us attractive to come here to work, I get it. But personally, I would never support a COLA for anybody, no matter where they are. I think you earn your money, you save your money, live within your means, and you don't have to worry about whether it's a 1% increase. My biggest concern here is how do we sustain this long-term? Whether it be this, or healthcare, or anything else, how do we sustain it? Because we're elected by the residents to be frugal with our money and be prudent with our spending, and how much more can we do? But I mean, I certainly support what Pepper's saying, but I just worry, I'm kind of being a buxom here, but I just worry, how do we sustain this long-term? Because every one of us in the county are going to pay it, even after we retire. And there are many of us who do not get a COLA and have been retired a long time and didn't get COLA since the 1980s, when most of the corporate world, and I realize this is not corporate, but in the corporate world, they stopped giving COLAs in the early 80s because of that very thing. Learn to save your money and be paid well for the job that you do. But I certainly understand the situation the county's in, like any other employer is today.
Commissioner Hertz?
My thing's this, we're sitting here talking about a COLA and a pension of what's going in the employee's pocket every month, but why aren't we talking about the health care at the same time? Because the next thing that's going to come up is health care, and how much more are we going to pay in health care per year? Health care is not getting cheaper. So if we give a 1% COLA here, they get 1% in their pocket, but how much are we giving them in health care? Are we giving them another 2% raise in health care when health care goes up? Or are we going to charge them more for health care? We should, to me, I would think we would talk about the total package at one time instead of just doing the pension and then come later with the health care. Because at the end of the day, it's a package to me. Are we giving them an increase in health care? Can we afford to give them the 1% COLA? But we should be talking about both at the same time, in my opinion.
So the question for Commissioner Scott was what we do for retirees on health care. So if you're over 65, you're eligible for Medicare if you're retired, and that is provided to you at no cost by the county. If you're under 65, you pay the same premium as an active employee, which is currently $89.80.
Thank you, sir.
So are we looking for a consensus, or is that what we're doing?
Commissioner Sweeney?
I'm in favor of 1%.
Okay, those in favor of 1%? Okay, you 6, 7 off.
And I guess what I would be in favor of, you know, I'm good with 1%, but I'm in favor of looking at it every year. Not saying,
You're almost gonna have
not
to.
doing it.
Exactly.
So if it's 1% or 2% or whatever it be, look at it and make determination from how much it's going to cost us and go from there.
Good news is it'll come up every year.
But I want them to know that we're going to look at it every year, all right? Instead of saying, well, we decided that we're not going to do it, we're just going to do it this year and not ever again. So.
Okay, so with that, Commissioner Angel, perhaps we can let Mr. Porter and Ms. Ross go for the evening. We certainly appreciate the presentation. You have any final words? So you understand they do want you to include a 1% average COLA per year in the assumptions. And that motion will be prepared for them for the business meeting next week.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much for having us, everybody.
Yep, thank you.
So what do you think, Trudy?
Jump in anytime.
Whatever we say, right, Judy?
Agreed.
Okay. Next thing on the agenda, proposed policy amendment, P2301. Alan, you handling this, or is Trudy?
So we're going to let Trudy introduce this revision.
Thank you, Mr. Criella. Good evening, Commissioners. Placed in your packet was the policy 4-2 with some revisions. And at the request of the Employee Council, modifications to policy 4-2, which is the closing of county offices, have been drafted to address liberal leave and delayed opening procedures, as well as comprising other minor revisions that clarify actual practice during a closing event. Language has been also incorporated, reiterating to staff that as public servants, we all can be designated as essential to assist in any capacity that may be required. Mr. Quiella, do you have any additional insights or reflections to add?
Great, thank you, Trudy. You did a really good job there. I think the memo clearly outlines the purpose of the revisions. Basically, there was a different application about this time last year, and that caused some confusion, mostly about what is liberal leave and how is liberal leave handled. Interesting enough, nothing in the policy ever mentioned the word liberal leave. Although it has probably been part of our building closing process, or at least the announcement, gosh, probably for the 26 years I've been here. So it's been a practice that's well-known, just not well-defined. So what this does is it establishes what is liberal leave, when can you use it, how you will have time deducted when you use liberal leave, and mostly clarifies that whenever there is no liberal leave, or when there is liberal leave, that the building is not closed. As commissioners are aware, when the building is closed, it triggers an extra half-time pay or equal time off for essential employees. And this really clarifies that this is not the case whenever the building is closed or there's a delayed opening so that the parking lot can be cleared, which are two common things that occur each time we have an inclement weather incident. Back to you, Chairman Angel.
Okay. Well, this policy does differentiate between employees and essential employees too, correct?
It does, and the policy always has addressed that issue. As you'll see, the policy is dated from the 90s, back before we had paramedics. So really it impacted our 911 employees back then, and certainly some wastewater folks. So I'm trying to, I guess, imagine what was going on back 30 years ago. Is every time it snowed and the building was closed, certain employees got paid to be home and certain employees had to work, and there really was no extra compensation for them. And so that it was, I'm just speculating here, so it was developed to address that inequity so that those folks who had to work when a building was closed, typically during an inclement weather incident or what we call special holidays, which have been eliminated from this policy. They recognize that those folks that are working can have equal time off or an extra half-time pay. So we did add some extra words that just clarify different meanings and practice, basically. These are the way we have typically handled inclement weather days in the payroll system and otherwise. We certainly wanted to impress upon employees that they're all public servants and they're all subject to be called to the county to assist in whatever way they can if they're needed. So certainly when it's a snow day, no county employees should think they're off for the day if they're needed, because we can send a Humvee out, or Colin will have a Humvee dispatched to pick you up and bring you in to help if need be. And certainly has happened in the past.
Mr. Maston?
Question, now, Mr. Quiella, is there a listing of what is essential personnel? Like I think the sewer plant's essential, your paramedics, that type of thing?
Yes, it's in the policy.
Okay,
It's been there.
Okay. So if we look at the folks here in this building, if the building is closed from 8 o'clock on, these folks do not have to take vacation or anything, correct?
They do not. So if your employer closes your workplace,
Okay.
Yes, they have an obligation to compensate you for that as they normally would.
Okay. The other example I'll use, and it's listed in this memo here, I think that you had provided to us about business closure. Mr. Conley was involved in that. I think the second scenario is where I question, where, let's say the building opens at 8 o'clock and maybe somebody lives downstate and they don't feel safe coming to work. So they call in that they're going to take liberal leave. But then, for whatever reason, 10 o'clock, it's deemed by DelDOT the roads aren't safe, so the building closes. A decision's made to close the building at 8 o'clock. In that scenario, to me, even though that individual called in liberal leave, theoretically, shouldn't that employee only be charged for 2 hours liberal leave? Because in fact, the building closed at, we'll say, the 8 to 10, so they closed at 10, they wouldn't be charged the other 6 hours?
So during a, maybe inclement weather, I mean, it's hard to predict if snow will close you at noon or not. So ideally, we want all employees to come to work every day.
Safely.
We'd like them to come to work certainly safely,
Yeah.
but every day we'd like employees to come to work. So one of the ways that you encourage them on days like this to come to work so that business can actually be accomplished and no lost productivity is to have some requirement that they come to work. And the requirement here is if you decide to call out for the day, just as if you were sick, you would have to use an entire day, whether the building was closed or not. And it's really the same process that's used if a person's on vacation. So the policy's always had a provision that if you're on vacation and the building is closed, say for a snow day, you still have to use that vacation day. And if you're out on FMLA for period of time in continuous days, you have to, that's still counted as an absence for that day. So it's consistent with how the policy has been applied. We only had a difference this last time when a decision was made to allow it to be divided in half.
I understand what you're saying, but I honestly don't agree with that. I think if an employee calls in for a liberal day off because it's maybe that in their mind, it's not safe for you and I would get out in the car and go, and then the building closes 2 hours, 3 hours later, I personally don't think it's fair that that employee is charged any time for liberal time. Again, that's just my opinion, but there again, you added another little wrinkle in there when you said if that person is put in for vacation that day and then the building is closed at 10 o'clock, I'm not sure that I understand why we would charge that employee for a full day's vacation. Maybe charge them for the amount of time, the 2 hours, but they would still have that 6 hours if it's an 8-hour day in the bank. That's just my humble opinion.
I have to agree with you 100%. I mean, obviously, if we open at 8 o'clock and they decided to close it at 10 o'clock and I decided to call in at 8 o'clock because I didn't feel safe, I probably made a smart decision.
Probably did.
If we're going to close down, then I probably made a smart decision by not coming out on the road. Yeah. I don't want to be responsible for any kind of tragedy over being overzealous with trying to get in here.
I don't want to be responsible for that either.
I think that if the building's closed, I don't think that the employee should be charged back for them hours at all.
Commissioner Hall?
Yeah, what they said. Really, because, if it's an 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock thing, I mean, we're talking about states of emergency. And I get encouraging employees to come in to work, but at the same time, I think we're only talking about a few days here and there where the weather is that bad, right? So you may have kids home from school, you may be on a back road and you can't, maybe the main roads are clear. So it's dicey, right? So it may be maybe I can get there, maybe I can't. I don't want anybody out there on the road trying to get in when all we're talking about is a few hours.
And this is a one-off situation. It's not like we live in Buffalo, New York, where this could go days at a time.
And so I'm with them.
Commissioner Sweeney?
Thank you. Who would be responsible for making the adjustment after the fact if they took an 8-hour day off and then at 10 o'clock we closed the building and that had to be adjusted to a 2-hour day?
So what they would do in that case is on their timesheet, they would just show that, guess they used 2 hours of vacation or sick leave, and the rest was RG, which you call regular. Now, of course, if this happens the way and I appreciate what your fairness argument is, I'm not sure where the incentive is for anyone to come to work when there's a possibility of snow. So we won't be able to operate the county if there's some thought that it'll be I'll only burn 4 hours, but I get a whole day off. There's also, in case you aren't aware, there is an expense to snow days, surprisingly. And also, if you're an essential person, you're wondering why you have to come to work and nobody else does, but that is the career they chose. I understand that. So the snow day we had last year was started out at noon, and then it was a full day the next day, and came back to work the next day. Although there was a delayed opening, so the parking lot should be cleared. But I'm pretty sure that last year with that one full day, it was a 24-hour period. The building closure ended at midnight. And cost-wise, all the employees who chose to get extra time, this would have been the half-time people, who got an extra half pay, was about $11,000 for that day. That doesn't seem like much. And it's not. What really cost us for that snow day was the 350 hours of equal time off. 350 hours, paramedic hours and wastewater hours of vacation, extra time off that they somehow had to schedule between January and July the 1st. So anytime we have a snow day, and this is why it's so carefully considered by the county administrator, is that cost. So $11,000, not that much, but union contracts in this policy require that we also offer, or in lieu of offer, the extra time off. 350 hours is a lot of people off of work. So just wanted to give you a sense of what the cost is when there is a snow day.
Mr. Sweeney.
So, did we ever put a work-at-home policy together?
We do have a work-at-home policy, yes.
So I don't see that taken into account here at all.
No, and it wasn't addressed in the building closing policy, yes. This is, and could you mandate that potentially if they already have their equipment? Right now, I think we only have one employee who consistently works from home. And while we do have the policy, that they actually have to have their equipment at home to do.
So most school districts right now are only accounting for one winter weather closing for the next few months. If they have 4 of those are going to be your schooling at home in one way or another. If we know ahead of time that there is inclement weather coming, can't the directors mandate that their employees take the equipment home to be prepared for an at-home work instead of having to take liberal leave?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we had that many surfaces available to folks. Our IT director might know the answer to that question. I know in my office, only 50% have such equipment, so they really can't work from home. Keeping in mind that your salaried people work all the time.
Right.
Yeah. Doesn't matter, snow or no snow.
They're going to work.
Yeah.
Since we haven't gone to electronic pay time cards yet, and we're still doing the old paper, how's that going to hurt, or is that going to help you, Trudy, or hurt you when it comes to payroll?
It depends on when it's decided.
It
depends on when it's decided. Right. If it's done before payroll, then the payroll coordinators and I and the finance payroll team will work together to get it changed and done. If it's done after the fact, we'll still work together to get it changed and get it done. Just takes a little bit more time.
Are we always a half pay check behind, so it doesn't interfere with the check that week?
Normally, we are.
Anybody else?
I just have a question. It's probably not in this, but Friday before Christmas, From a state job, I'd taken vacation, was out of state. Governor Carney gave us Friday off. And I was concerned about, was I going to get that day back or what? And the state just automatically gave me the day back. Is that what happens here? If someone's on vacation and then, say, for instance, Santa Claus gave them a day off, did they get that day off, or how's that work for here?
It never worked that way with me. If I was on vacation on a cruise out in the middle of the Caribbean and they had a snow day here in Delaware, I didn't get that day back.
No, you shouldn't. I mean, if you take vacation, you're taking vacation thinking in my world, we don't get that day back, you know?
But the state does.
State does.
And
I
you know-
was a state employee. I didn't get it back.
Well, but, I mean, I don't know about Commissioner Pepper, but with me, I'm told, you're gonna take these we're gonna charge you, and you're gonna take these 2 weeks off, whether you want to or not. So, okay, so that's the rules, but then the 23rd, they just said, okay, we're gonna declare it a state holiday, and we're gonna give you your 7.5 hours back.
Maybe holidays different, but what about a closing? If they had closed during one of those days, did you get that time back?
Now, if I take vacation, there's a holiday that falls in between my vacation, say Christmas or whatever, I do get the vacation day. I don't get charged a vacation day for the holiday. As long as I take a vacation day before and after, I get the holiday free. But vacation's vacation. I mean, if you take vacation, I mean, so technically we could have a blizzard. You could take a week's vacation under this scenario. You could have a blizzard and the county be shut down for a whole week and you're out on a cruise enjoying life and you didn't get charged nothing. Now you got another week to take off. Somewhere you got to draw the line. If you take a week's vacation, you're expected to be off for that week, and you can't expect the county to maybe close because of snow.
So, Mr. Quill, is there a way to differentiate between the pre-planned vacation time off and a closing as opposed to a liberal time off and a closing?
Question. So now we're going to punish the employees for taking vacation?
No, I'm saying if you
that's
take
what
a
I'm asking.
vacation, if you take a planned vacation and there
I
happens to be a
understand that.
closing.
I mean, for one, how many snow days has the county been shut down in the last 3 years?
Well, and that was part of the confusion last year because we hadn't had a snow day in
Right,
2
we've had
years.
maybe 2 days in the last 3 years. I mean, I understand what you're saying about vacation, but I also understand that I don't think that we should punish the employee either. It's a benefit. That's why we give it to them.
I agree. I think it's an exceptional scenario. It's not like 10 days.
It's not like Buffalo, New York.
Right.
Right. If we lived in Buffalo,
You had, what, a half a day
Have a
plus a
different conversation.
6-hour day last year?
It was a full day and started at noon the day before. So I think it.
So a day and a half
yeah,
first.
typically, it seems like we get snowstorms right either on or right at the end of a weekend, and so it tends to close the building on. So you don't really know it's coming often. It happens to close on a Monday. In this case, I think it was questionable. The county administrator had everybody come in, mostly because of the cost I just described. And then it really started snowing hard, and so that's why he closed it at noon. And he decided, in that scenario, that those folks who did liberal leave would only get 4 hours deducted, because policy allows him to decide that stuff. Although liberal leave, not defined. So that's what he decided to do. And then the next day, it was a full day. It closed at, the snow day ended at midnight, also decided by the county administrator. Although I'm sure anybody who was working after midnight would have thought the roads were equally as treacherous, but they no longer got their extra half pay. And then he recognized that the parking lot needed to be cleared, and he did a delayed opening. Not poorly choice of words in the notice, but it was a delayed opening, essentially, so the parking lot could be cleared. Some employees, this happens on delayed openings, they, for one reason or another, don't read their text. They show up. They come to work at 8. They get time and a half for being there for when everybody else? And so the answer to that is no, under current practice, they would not, just like anybody who was working from midnight to 8 did not. Do they get to leave 2 hours later? No, they do not. You came in at 8 o'clock, you worked till 5. That's what you're paid to do. Everybody else was asked not to come in so that they could get the parking lot cleared. Did they get paid for that? Yes, they did. They got RG just like they were there. That's what happened. Now, could somebody who's an essential employee say, is that really fair that they got paid and since they didn't work for 2 hours? I'm sure they would, because they didn't get time and a half. So that's why it's such a, a complicated process, because you have one group of people who are essential, and it's a large group of people who get an extra half pay when essentially nobody else is working there, when they're scheduled to work. So, and it costs $11,000 a day plus 354 hours of equal time off, and it adds up.
So where does that leave us, Alan?
So, so I think what I'm hearing is you don't like not paying people who you want to pay people who decide to take liberal leave if the building closes at some times during the day. I think everything else you're okay with. That's in the policy. Is that what I think I'm hearing?
I think that's right.
All right. So in this,
Do it that way?
right. So in this scenario, yes, at noon, if the building closes, they called out, they only have to burn 4 hours.
Right.
Correct.
And if it closes all day, they burn nothing.
Well, that's right, they would.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Alan, so you'll draft a new motion?
So we'll draft the motion for the next business meeting, yes.
Thank you. Any public comments on these two items? Any public comments?
Our public's behind you.
Hey, Chris.
Hello, Chris Conley, Employee Council. First off, I wanted to thank you guys for considering this and bringing it through leadership that came out of the Employee Council. We don't have things that arrive here that often for consideration, deliberation. I think it's a complicated matter, but it boils down to a couple simple facts, which is I think we do need to prioritize safety over cost. I think that's important. I think it's an extenuating circumstance. It doesn't happen very often. And the bottom line, when I came to be aware of this situation, was if the county's closed, the employees should not have to take accrued time, period, end of statement. That was the sentiment, and you're hearing it from Chris Conley, but that's the sentiment. I'm representing the 300 employees, union and non, and I understand the essential side, the non-essential side, so really, that's the message that I wanted to convey. So I appreciate the deliberation and the outcome of that. The vacation day, Commissioner Pepper, I don't disagree with that either. But I've always known that's been in the policy for me to say, well, if we ever get into it and it's considered that, again, if the county closes, extenuating circumstance, why do you charge it a vacation day? So that's all I have on that. I appreciate the time. Real quickly on the pension valuation and the OPEB valuation that Commissioner Hertz mentioned, I do agree that those are hand in hand for retirees. I'm a member of the Pension Review Committee that didn't arrive at a decision on the COLA for retirees, and that's why you guys get paid the big bucks. But I continually appreciate through the budget process, and we'll do that right now, you guys putting such a high importance on deciding to continue to keep those effective. Because in terms of attraction and retention of employees and succession planning and all the things that we deal with, I think it is critical, and I appreciate that you guys pay attention to that. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Any other public comments?
Mr. Angel, just one clarification. Chris mentioned that if the building's closed, every employee should get not have to use vacation day. Obviously, if you're an essential employee, you have to come to work if you're scheduled to work. Just keep that in mind. Or if you get called in because you're designated essential.
If we could apply actuarials to this, we're never going to get snow anymore anyway. So.
Good point, good point.
How far are your feet raised, sir? Okay. Back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, and thank you for the comments on that. You're welcome to stay, Trudy. Next item is Planning Services Committee. Mrs. Masson, Chair, turn it over to you, ma'am.
We have a rail land presentation by Linda Morkowski from the County Economic Partnership, Executive Director. Would you come down, Linda?
What if she said no? What if she says no?
She will.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for having me here. Oh, but we have a presentation. Is that okay? You still want us up here?
Good, Mayor.
I'll leave your clicker down.
Yep.
I don't want to turn around.
Yeah. And I prefer you point to that screen.
She likes addressing us.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for having me here. Linda Parkowski, and with me tonight is Marilyn Smith, who is the Executive Director of the Kent County MPO.
Good evening,
So,
thank you.
We want to give you just highlights. We promise to be a lot faster than the first go
Yeah, we'll
round.
see.
Make it a little more understandable, too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we promise to do
Dollar
that
amount,
for
we're
you.
out of
So
here.
let me make sure I'm going the right way. So tonight we're going to present on the rail corridor land use study that we, KEP, asked MPO to conduct. And why is freight rail important? And lots of times when we talk about rail, everybody thinks of passenger rail. But freight rail is extremely important in the industrial sector. Two of our largest companies that have moved into Kent County recently have needed rail. That has been part of their requirement. They actually located along the rail. For large loads, rail's more effective. Rockport, the Rockport study, which is the economic analysis study everybody's heard over and over, 2.0 identified industrial manufacturing still as our targeted industries for Kent County. And large parcels of land along the rail attract larger companies with higher paying jobs and more jobs. So that's why freight rail is important. So what's changed in 20 years? Why is freight rail extremely important?
Can you click the thing?
Oh, yeah, sorry. It's here. He clicked
There you
it.
The next one.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. So, yeah, what's changed in 20 years? Prior to 2015 or 16, Norfolk Southern ran the freight line. And in 2016, a short line called Delmarva Cargo and a Carload Express picked up the short line from Norfolk Southern. And they took a more aggressive stance with really trying to go out and getting more industrial customers to use the freight line. Norfolk Southern really didn't care too much about what was happening on the Delmarva Peninsula. So that really was the game changer when they took over. And then rail demand started on the rise. There's a lot of reasons for that. And we'll talk about some of them, but there's a truck driver shortage, there's a truck shortage, and it's become very cost effective for larger, heavier loads to move by freight rail. So, in 2018, the KEP commissions the MPO for a study, and I'll let Marilyn talk about both those studies.
Okay, so thank you again for giving us a little time to talk about this study. So in 2018, we did what became the first version of this study. Basically, it was very limited review of parcels along the rail, and we came up with 5 recommendations. As of now, none of those recommendations had been implemented, or very minimally. So we started there and looked at those and said, are those recommendations still valid? And we determined that they were, but that they were just not enough. to Linda's point about what has changed, even those 5 recommendations were not enough to meet our current circumstances and the current demand for industrial use along the rail. And so that was the jumping off point for the study that we completed this year. So basically, we identified appropriate available land adjacent to rail corridors, which could be designated and preserved for industrial use. We created an interactive mapping tool for examining specific parcels of land. This was really designed with KEP in mind and with planners in mind, municipal planners, county planners in mind. But it is certainly useful for anyone who wants to take the time to get on the map and figure out how to use it. But it was very much designed for people who would be in the weeds and using it every day. And then we offered guidance to help communities work towards making the most of rail-adjacent properties while avoiding some of the negative impacts. Because it's not lost on us that not everybody wants an industrial use along the rail, even though they may have the opportunity to do so. So the study does include some recommendations, some best practices, some techniques for being a good neighbor kind of thing. And so that was basically the focus. But this study was very parcel specific. In the weeds, directly parcel by parcel. And so you're going to see that in the next couple of slides. So then the next thing that we did was we looked at all the comprehensive plans. So there were 14 comprehensive plans. The purpose of reviewing the comprehensive plans was to ascertain if rail freight related uses or proposed future uses were being considered in those plans. Identify land use zoning map changes regarding industrial zoning, identify potential areas where rail freight related uses might be supported by a possible spur line. 11 of the plans do not specifically highlight rail uses. And as you can see there, Clayton, Felton, Harrington highlight rail uses. Kent County, Clayton, Dover, and Harrington provided information regarding future investments into freight and passenger rail, but none of the comp plans contain freight data or use in their economic development chapters. So the takeaway of that is, even if the rail is running through your community, it's not something that most communities are giving a lot of active consideration toward as they're looking towards comprehensive planning. So the nitty gritty of the study, and you see those tiny, tiny, tiny spreadsheets. If you want to see those in more detail, they're all available on our website, and you can pour through them to your heart's content. But basically, when we started working with Linda, we set up some parameters, because when we did the initial compilation of parcels, there were about 600 parcels along the rail. So, you know, north to south in the county, there were about 600 parcels. Now, we knew, obviously, that the bulk of those parcels were not available, right? That for whatever reason, they were not available for consideration, but we had to have some kind of a weeding out process. We had to have some kind of a systematic exclusionary process. So we took out highly impacted with wetlands or other environmental concerns, parcels in ag land preservation, parcel configurations that were kind of wonky, that didn't really work, or if they didn't have any kind of access to the rail at all, even if there was maybe an adjacency, but getting to them was nearly impossible. And then also residential open space and various standalone residential properties. So all of those went out. And so that's what you see if you decide some night when you're up in the middle of the night to start going through those 2 tables of parcels. That's what you're going to see, is that the yellow section are every single parcel, all those 600, and then the red section is the alphabetical listing by jurisdiction of all of those parcels, about 440 that were excluded based on that criteria. So once we had that little group of parcels that were going to remain, then an effort was made to group those parcels in such a way as to identify possible configurations that could attract small to medium-sized industrial businesses that, as Linda said, were specifically asking for rail access. By grouping these parcels, and as you'll see, Linda's going to highlight a couple in particular, but by grouping the parcels, some of them, there were 3 or 4 or 10 small acreage, but when we started to look at them and started grouping them, you could get to some reasonably sized sites that could be considered for a rail-dependent industry.
So this is just an example of part of the tiling and mapping system that we now have on the MPO's website, and we link to it from our website. And this is extremely important because in the past, we've been able to see what, maybe what parcels are there. You would have to, if you wanted to search for a parcel for a company, you would have to go to 4, 5, 6 different screens in order to get the information that now we can do with one click because of what the MPO. And, you know, when companies are inquiring, you want to have a quick turnaround. You want to be reactive as quickly as possible to their inquiry. And large parcels are usually an industrial or an agricultural user. They want to know about the utilities. Can the electric, supply what they need? Is there sewer available? Can we get natural gas? They're all questions that are asked up front before they even select a location. So this slide's extremely important. We can tell where the sewer districts are, the water. Chesapeake gave us their areas. Delmarva, not so much. Delaware Electric Co-op did give us all their information. So, and Marilyn and I presented this at a freight study about a month ago, the winter freight meeting. We had brokers come up afterwards and said, wow, we cannot believe that this information is in one place. Can you get this done for Newcastle and Sussex? So
that was our conversation earlier today.
Kent is the leader on this, and this, is really, really amazing. So we really looked at what large parcels areas are available. We wanted to just not helter-skelter all over the place. We wanted to take a real pragmatic view. And our position is we're not going to ask for rezoning. We're not going to ask for anything. We're going to do this step by step. And the first step is awareness, and that's what this is. We did give this presentation to the Regional Planning Commission. We are setting up presentations for the next 3 municipalities that you're going to see on here. There really is, northern part of Kent, there isn't land any available. If you ride along the railroad, it's housing developments. That's all been zoned for housing. So there isn't large industrial space in the northern part of Kent County. So we need to do whatever we can, especially to raise the awareness so that we can keep some of the land that's in the southern portion for industrial or agricultural use that needs rail. So one of the municipalities is Viola, has about 250 acres. And I can tell you the last couple inquiries, one was for 150 acres, another one was for 50 acres. On the rail, they're not looking for 2 acres. They want, it's a large user that's going to need a large amount of land where they can get a spur.
Oh, yeah, well, Linda said where they can get a spur.
Where they can get a spur.
So, yeah, they need.
And one of the criteria with this study was also we wanted to make sure these parcels had available road frontage or road use, that they could get to a road easily with, because usually there's either trucks in or trucks out. So Viola is one of them. All these parcels are zoned AR right now. And we're trying to set up meetings, as I said. The other place that has...
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Can you go back to that?
Sure.
Viola?
Wait, hold on. Oh, I'm going the wrong way.
We're done.
Oh, Mark, you get me to Viola, please. Thank you. I'm rolling.
Yeah, that one.
That one's Harrington.
That one.
There's Viola. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
So, those blue areas are all at zoned AR. They're owned by farmers. If we went in there and a developer, some industrial warehouse manufacturer came in and said, I want one of those, we've already been down the road of trying to rezone AR to IG in order to put solar in, which is not impactful at all. How's it going to go over that they want to put in a warehouse with a spur in the middle of that farm pristine farmland.
Well, I really think it depends on the owner because the price for industrial land is going to be a lot higher than it is for AR.
I get that.
Right.
But it was the same thing for solar. And,
Well,
but
the
everybody
solar,
else
they were
around-
paying AR and AC rates for that land. They weren't paying IL rates for that land.
Yeah, but the result of the solar discussion was no more solar in AR land. It has to go in IG. That's going to have to be rezoned to IG. And I can tell you right now from experience, everybody around that's going to say, no, you're not putting that in my backyard. And they'll be sitting out here in the Southern Farmers for Awareness saying, we don't want that.
And I'm not going to disagree with you because I'm not I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future. But I think that if the area and the landowners want to rezone, they have an opportunity to do that.
So maybe, what I like about this is, you did the analysis and you whittled it down. We're not looking at, the entire county from north to south saying, be prepared and be opened for all those NIMBY.
Right.
Pushback. But, so between the infrastructure and access and road, so it's a matter of seeing the value and being willing to sit through the pitchforks.
Yeah.
Maybe even get pitchforked after the meeting. For the greater benefit, for the longer term economic benefit of the county.
Right, because this is going to produce jobs. If this is going to produce good, high-paying jobs, where the housing is going to produce your taxes, but this is going to produce jobs if done correctly. If we don't have all the pitchforks out, I can't predict that, but
Pitchforks will be, Mr. Thompson coming down here and saying, I can't hunt that land anymore. The migratory birds coming out of Canada can't go through Delaware anymore.
I got it.
I can't see the road anymore because of that. So I get it. I absolutely get it.
Right.
How much IG land is along the railroad tracks between Dover and the county line?
There's
none.
That's where you have to go to one of these little
There-
spreadsheets.
there's nothing
and
left.
get your big magnifying glass.
Nothing.
But it's minimal. I mean, so Linda talks about the tiles, and you kind of see, Laura, can you maybe go back one onto the one that says utilities? So see those square boxes?
Mm-hmm.
That was the mapping system that we used to kind of get our arms around this project. And so each of those use your imagination. Each of those little square boxes
Not that mapping.
is what we called a tile. And we organized the tiles from north to south, and then there's that little spur that goes east. And so when you look in each of those tiles, then you see the map and you see exactly what's in that tile in greater detail. There's 43 tiles altogether. There are about 12, really, that have any potential at all. So when Mike, many of you know Mike Ward, my GIS guy, Mike. It ended up being, Mike's dozen favorite tiles, because those were the only places where what Linda's talking about, and then when you look forward and you see the Viola tile and you see Felton, you're exactly right, Commissioner. There's not 43 tiles that this study really hones in on. And to your point, Commissioner, we talked about what are the kinds of uses, and yeah, everybody has a preconceived idea that it's solar or that it's warehouse, but we also talked about there could be agriculture-related industries that need a spur. Do we need feed in? Do we need feed out? Do we need a commodity out? Do we need fertilizer in? So it's that bigger conversation about once particular uses end up on this land, the conversation's done, right? And so for us, from a transportation's perspective, of course,
That's right.
Linda and I speak the same language as far as the intersection between transportation and economic development. But for us, it really is, When certain uses happen in these parcels, then there's really no longer a transportation interest, right? I mean, for all practical purposes.
So
you've got your thing
the,
fixed up and now you,
so Viola, Felton, and Harrington are the only three municipalities that really have large parcels of land left in Kent County. That's it. And, you know,
So what percentage of that, those three communities are government-owned?
none,
None?
none,
yeah.
none, none. And they're
That's
either
also
owned.
detailed on this, if you dive into the spreadsheet, it lists the ownership, so you can kind of play around with that too.
They're either zoned AR or AC, and they're all pretty much individually owned. And we've, like Marilyn said, we've eliminated anything that was ag preservation, because I've been trying to make that same comment to the Ag Preservation Board. Let's not preserve this land along the rail. You know, think about that as you're creating ag preservation districts. Some of our next steps, we're going to meet with these municipalities that have the larger parcels, at least make them aware. We are meeting with state planning. They want to start in all the comp plans where the municipalities have rail, start incorporating a chapter, something with economic development, something about freight rail, which would be good. And
We're doing some annexations.
They won't. I can tell you that right now, but they'll be out in force.
I know.
Well, and that's that was not lost on us in this. And so if you have a chance to browse the study a little bit, you'll see a couple of appendices and a couple of the things we included, like I said, were some of those good neighbor practices, some of those thoughts about compatibility. We tried really hard to find some kind of zoning ordinance somewhere in the country that could, it's always hard to start from a blank page, but if you can start from something else and then pick and choose and rewrite the things, it's easier. And we found two across the whole country, only two, and we labeled them in the appendices called a sample rail overlay district. It's a place to start. It's a place for people to start thinking and having conversation.
Well,
so we did provide
past zoning decisions have left us in this situation with housing. And then at that point in time, when those decisions were being made, freight rail wasn't important, and it wasn't as needed, and it wasn't as required. So now at least we recognize that freight rail is important, and we have an opportunity to maybe save some parcels for industrial use along the rail in Kent.
So go back to the 2018 5 recommendations. One of those was for setbacks off of railroad tracks for residential. You said none of them were implemented.
Buffers, right.
So that's, setback off. Are any of those incorporated in the new zoning ordinances?
Without looking at it, I'm not going to venture to guess.
So is that something that needs to come up when we have the workshop?
Well, it is. And, the other thing is we want to, maybe University of Delaware IPA to really take a good look at some of the zoning ordinances throughout the municipalities and the county and come up with something that will work. Because I don't think a housing development, I don't know if I would want my house right along the railroad track,
Yeah, because I don't want a housing development next to a railroad track, and then 2 years from now I'm complaining about every night at 7 o'clock I'm going to bed and a train goes through. Well, you shouldn't have built there.
But you have that right now in the unincorporated side of Smyrna at Hickory Ridge Road.
I know.
Bergmont Woods, and I get tons of complaints, and I said, your town limits, call town hall. Because I can't do anything about it, but they knew the train was there when they built those 200 plus.
And freight rail is only going to increase. So those housing developments, that freight's going to keep on coming, and more and more and more of, especially with cargo lifts. So we just.
Viola is the only one in my district. I want to be included when you meet with them.
Certainly. We would love to have you included.
Fly on the wall, but if they can't do that, I'll be there.
We have to see how much of that land is actually in the town.
There's
'cause
none.
It may end up being the county.
They will never, one council member, as long as he's still on there, there will never be an annexation.
Right.
I couldn't convince them to annex the solar into their, out of the county, so we didn't get a deal with it, so, yeah, it's not gonna happen.
So happy to answer any questions. Just wanted to bring the, we have an opportunity to maybe do something in the future here in Kent County for freight rail and for industrial uses and for job creation. So that was the purpose. Thank you.
No, I'm not done, you can't thank
Oh,
me.
right.
I don't see the questions and thank you up there
okay.
yet, so.
All right, got it.
no, no,
How about
no.
there? There's thank you. There's thank you. Any questions? You got it.
So where do we stand on truck freight instead of rail freight? So we had been looking at the possibility of attracting some type of, truck
Yes,
stop out
and
on
we
Route
are
1.
still attracting. There's a study going on about truck amenities, truck stop amenities right now.
Plaza amenities.
There is a student at Del Tech that's doing a whole study on truck stops right now also. And then we still are in discussion with a potential truck stop. We know we need it.
Yes.
We know that there is a absolute need. You see all the trucks parked. I think
We
you
gotta
were
get them
part-
off the side of the road and out of neighborhoods.
Everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. We know that there's definitely a need. What we need to figure out is how we can create the incentives to attract it, because we're on a peninsula and that is a deterrent from, attracting an actual truck stop. So we need to figure out, is there some sort of incentive that we can create that can bring that truck stop to Kent?
And that's one of the things, the study that we're working on, which will be ready, and, well, the draft was on my desk today, so it's this close. But that's one of the things that we're looking at, is what is kind of the range of a small, medium, large travel plaza, and what are the industry standards, or what are their expectations? So if we're trying to court a public-private partnership, what do they expect to see as far as truck volume? How many gallons of fuel do they expect to sell, both regular gas and diesel fuel? Because it's about diesel fuel, right? I mean, so they don't want to just know about volume. They want to know about commercial truck volume. So that's what we've been working on, is to try to, and then also small, medium, large. How many acres do they need? What are they expecting as far as quick food service? What are they expecting as far as number of pumps? That's what you'll be seeing here in a couple of months when we
The
finish that
incentive
project.
could be that, maybe the land is public. Maybe there's a long-term lease. We may have to really get creative in trying to really figure out how to attract, because they're not knocking down our door. It's not like freight rail,
When you say how to attract, what's
attract the
incentive?
truck companies, the truck plaza,
You're talking about
Travel
funding?
Plaza developers.
travel plaza developers.
Possible.
I'm saying maybe, if we could create a public-private partnership. That's the Welcome Center on 95 is a public-private partnership. That's DelDOT and HMS Host. DelDOT provided the land, long-term lease, HMS Host put up the building, did all, and
Putting a
operates.
bid right now for a Buc-ee's?
All right, sounds good.
Okay, I'm going to put that in the footnotes
once
of
we
the
get the
study.
Once we get the study done, it's kind of like Rockport. Once we get the study done, then we can use that data and that analysis to go out and really pitch and attract. Go ahead, Alan, sorry.
Alan's got a question. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Angel?
Thank you.
Sorry.
Well, it's a little disconcerting that all these towns and municipalities didn't put it in their comp plan or even have a discussion about it. That's one of the greatest economic development tools that they just bypassed. Is there a reason? Have you talked to anybody why they didn't look at it, or?
Out of sight, out of
Can I
mind.
answer?
Sure, go for it.
For Viola, they don't want it.
That's small. I'm talking bigger.
All right, so,
Felton's not much bigger.
Dover is.
Felton does, well, we've already determined Dover doesn't have land anymore.
Well, not true. Okay, there is one section, but I was going to get that for the truck. So, anyway,
no, well, and that is concerning. And when state planning was actually made aware of it, I really think it goes down to when Norfolk Southern was along the rail, there was no interest in them doing anything. And a lot of the comp plans are 10 years old or 8 years old. So I don't think the awareness was there at that point in time. So people weren't even thinking about putting it in their comp plans.
okay.
Yeah, but county did. The county did, and county addressed it as economic. Kent County did cover it.
Okay, to address the trucking issue, because they're all over the place and around where I'm living. So, I mean, I got neighbors that have put up signs, gone to Del Dot, got no parking. They can't even see. You're going to get hit or killed trying to pull out. So, but, yes. However, the old Civic Center over behind Lowe's and by Sam's Club that they were going to build there, it's on the backside of McKee Road. It's on the route side of 113. It's right near an exchange coming off of Route 1. Perfect place for put a truck
Del State own it
housing
now?
type. I'm sorry?
Del State owns it, right?
I don't know who owns it now.
Del
but
State owns it.
Convention
Right.
Center, Del State.
Convention
Del State
Center, yeah.
owns it.
So, but that area
Yeah.
tying in both sides, you can get to Route 8, you can get down POW-MI Highway.
Yeah.
Would be a great hub for something like that.
I agree.
So,
Yes.
Most
Well, we
truck stop
certainly-
is too far off the main road, though.
no, it's not. Because you got the exchange right there coming off of 1.
Yeah, but when you travel the I-95, the I-70s, the 60s, the 50s, those T&A and Pilot and are right on it.
One of the best spots when we actually did a site with a truck stop developer, truck plaza developer. One of the best sites was the Smyrna Rest area, to actually expand the Smyrna Rest area to include a full-blown travel plaza. But there's a lot of wetlands there.
I know,
Right there where Middale Auto Salvage.
yeah.
No, that's Delaware's.
And then the other site they liked was where they put the surplus furniture from the state.
The Middale.
That one,
Middale.
they love that.
Middale Salvage.
Yeah.
That's
They
perfect
love
right there
that
off of
site.
119.
But really, they like the area up the Smyrna kind of area.
So given the limitations that I think you're finding with the rail study, wouldn't it be better to focus on the truck freight and that type of feature in the
We can
county?
focus on all of it.
Oh, yes, I get that.
Come on.
And for us, I mean,
Right.
there's an expectation, we are all modes of transportation, so we're focused on both.
Zach sitting back there going, all of it, really, Linda? All of
I
it?"
know, really. Like, I know what that means tomorrow. He's saying it, right?
But it's just not diesel now, it's electric trucks too.
Yeah.
So that's coming.
Which the governor wants to get rid of all diesel by 2035. Yeah, I'm just saying.
Right.
Our farmers may have something to say about diesel.
So any other questions?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. And I will include you with Viola, I promise.
I don't mean to beat you up, but
No, that's fine. I can handle it.
the truck freight has always been a huge.
We agree. And, and I'm grateful that the state actually did a truck parking study. I'm
Yeah.
very grateful. Now we just need to figure out how to implement. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
So I guess what we'll need is a plaza up north
Public
and down
comments?
south, so when the trucks come down out of Pennsylvania, the diesel will have to stop and
Switch to gas.
drive through Delaware, and then when they get to the bottom,
Maryland, they get their diesel again.
that was sarcasm.
Public comment.
Public comment. Public comments.
No.
Public comment.
No, no.
Ask.
Oh, I'm sorry. Does anyone have any public comment?
Them.
Anyone have any public comment? Back to you.
Okay, so you're adjourned. Public Works, Commissioner Hertz.
All right, we got change order number 1 to commercial trash collection service contract, and I'm gonna turn it over to Miss Diana, and she'll explain.
So this change order focuses on, I think I just turned it off. Okay, good evening, everyone. This change order focuses on 2 locations. Pump Station 1, where we had intended to reduce the number of dumpsters, and we've actually had it remain the same. So that's an increase to the cost of the contract, which was awarded by Levy Court. The contract is currently held by BFI Waste Services, also known as Republic Services of Delmar. And then the other location is the treatment plant. We needed to add a 20 cubic yard dumpster at the influent building. We have some new screens there, and so we're seeing an increase in the capture of materials. Not only have we added a second dumpster, we've changed the time period for collection. So it was every other week, and now it's weekly. So on the estimate for that is that the majority of this change order is associated with the dumpster at the plant. Only $2,800 of it, and then rounding down, is associated with Pump Station 1, and none of this includes tonnage.
Is there any questions from the commissioners? Mr. Sweeney? Commissioner Sweeney?
So Diana, the increase in capture at the screens, is that because we're using better screens or because there's more stuff coming from users?
We believe it's because we have new screens that were installed in October.
Okay.
But we also do see more material from more users. But the majority of it has to do with having better
The
screens.
stuff they're putting in their systems is not compatible with our, can we do a media campaign to inform people that there's this stuff that you're putting in here, you really got to stop?
And we have used our Facebook page for that, but I'm sure we can also work with Kelly to get more word out to folks.
Yep.
So one of the things that during COVID, with folks being home, one of the educational campaigns was about wipes. Even those that are labeled flushable wipes truly do not degrade and are something that we have to remove from the system.
Wow.
So that there are materials, and then if you end up with stuff, folks who are at Firefly and they're using the porta potties, we've seen phones, clothing. You don't know what could end up in a porta potty at a concert.
Oh, yeah, I can. Are there any more questions from any other commissioners?
What was the tonnage last year, Ms. Diane?
Again, the tonnage isn't included in this, so I'd have to go back. I can get you some information on that.
It's not necessary, I was just curious. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any public comment?
No, we gotta
Move this forward to business.
Put this on the consent agenda?
Yep. 7.
Ayes have it.
I'll just stay in case there's any public questions.
There you go.
Turn it back to the president.
Thank you. Keep turning that off, habit. Thank you. Seeing no public comments, we'll move on. We do have an executive session that we'll be leaving here for momentarily, and we will not be coming back. So, just any commissioner has any comments, Alan?
President Pepper, whenever I had a conversation with the county attorney about this topic you see here, he believes that it should be done during the public session.
Okay. So we're not
than-
going to do this executive session, we're going to do it right now, correct, Mr. Eliza? Going to do it right here? Okay, sounds good.
Of course,
Do it.
If we got into a specific thingamajig, then we might have to
Yeah, right.
break for
State your
executive
name and be
session.
sworn in or affirmed.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, FOIA is a handful. It's a handful. But aren't we lucky? We have Kelly Pitts, we've got Lori Tanaka. You don't have to be FOIA coordinators, any of you, do you? I mean, some of these small municipalities, they've got FOIA coordinators who don't know a whole lot about FOIA and only work 20 hours a week. It's a hot mess, but we don't have that problem. Nevertheless, I think there are some things that we should talk about so that we can be better commissioners, better staff, better county attorneys, and so forth. The key to it all, it seems to me, and this is designed to be a question and answer session. We can wait till the end. We can have questions in the middle. It doesn't matter to me. But you have to start with the definitions, obviously. And the key ones that I'm wanting to talk about in the beginning of this is what's a public body? What are public records? Of course, there's also the notion of, what's a public meeting? But that kind of just falls into what's a public body. A public meeting is a meeting held by a public body. So it really boils down to that. And some of these things are in that 82-page, that obnoxious document that I supplied that is designed as a a training vehicle for FOIA coordinators. But it's pretty good. There's some good stuff in here. And I'm going to start with what is a public body. Obviously, all the committees, the Kent County Levy Court, these are all public bodies. Why? And there are some misconceptions about this, but if you look at it, if it's supported in whole or in part by any public funds, or it expends or disperses any public funds, including grants, gifts, or other dispersals or distributions, or, and here's the interesting one, is impliedly or specifically charged by any other public official, body, or agency to advise or to make reports, investigations, or recommendations. To me, this includes almost anything. An ad hoc committee, for example. My wife hates my war stories, but I have some pretty good ones, so I'm going to share one with you now. I remember probably 16 or 18 years ago, there was a small Kent County municipality. I wasn't really involved. I was kind of, tangentially involved, I guess you would say, but I wasn't a decision maker. They formed a charter committee, okay? So they thought they had this nailed by making sure that combinations of town council would serve on this charter committee, but not a quorum, one or two different combinations. And then they had some citizens who kind of did some of the heavy lifting, frankly, and they put together a report, and it was a pithy report, and it was the basis for going to the legislature and implementing maybe 30 pages worth of modifications to their town charter, right? And I can tell you that not a one of those meetings was ever noticed, and the public was not invited. And the thinking was, well, it's not a quorum of the town council. I mean, how true, but it falls under this definition of public body, which is almost anything. I mean, really. Frankly, if they had just put together citizens to be to make the recommendations for charter changes, in my opinion, you have to go through all the bells and whistles that Lori does all the time and notices the meetings. So I think that's just kind of a vivid illustration of the depth and the breadth of FOIA, that it would bring in a lot of institutions, that's a little strong, lots of committees and groups that you would not think is subject to FOIA, but It is. And it is another interesting thing. Even the General Assembly, except for caucusing, the GA, who wrote the statute, who's amended the statute a few times, the General Assembly is subject to FOIA, but not caucusing. And I can't even tell you how many times I have worked with municipalities who think that any sensitive topic that they don't want to discuss, out in the open, that they just go into an executive session and have a discussion about something that's very sensitive. Well, and I tell them all the time, you are not allowed to caucus. You may not caucus, and we can't caucus either. So that's something to keep in mind, that you have to figure out, we're a public body. Is this a topic that we have to air in public, or is it something within those limited exceptions where we can go undercover and have a robust discussion about it? And I'm looking again at my little document that I supplied, and I love this one. Statutory exceptions are strictly interpreted. Yeah, they sure are. I call this the 99% rule. If it's a, if it meets and it discusses public topics, if it advises, there's a 99% certainty that it's a public body. That should always be your default. If you have questions, ask me, ask someone else, and we'll figure out whether it's a public body or not. But I haven't really come across, leadership is not a public body for a variety of reasons. It's not caucusing, there's no quorum, but just about anything else that advises you directly would be a public body, in my opinion. Next area I wanted to discuss, well, before I move on, any questions about that? What's a public body? Okay. What are public records? And definition is very broad, of course. Documents, anything in electronic format. If it relates to public purposes, as far as I'm concerned, that's just about anything, isn't it? If it's written, if it's electronic, if it relates to public purposes, it's a public record. Emails between commissioners over, a public subject matter, over a public purpose. Text messages, right? Very likely to meet the low, undefined public purpose threshold. If you can imagine all these definitions, but public purpose is not one of them. So it's almost anything, isn't it? So it's unfortunate, but I think text messaging and emails, even among two commissioners, is probably something that should be avoided.
Doc, is text messaging considered public only if it comes from my publicly provided phone or from my personal phone also?
That's a great question.
Because it's me, or is it my device?
I think if it relates to a public purpose, I think it turns on the subject matter, and I think if if you had a FOIA request, you'd probably have to cough those messages up. I mean, I don't think it's a big deal. I'm not suggesting that you're discussing anything untoward. I'm just talking about the annoyance of perhaps having to produce those types of things. That's all I'm saying. So I think you should communicate in that way to a minimum. Talk on the telephone. Imagine that. We don't do that as much as we used to, but maybe that's the takeaway from that.
We do.
And remember, and this is a favorite, does a public body have to create reports in response to a FOIA request? The answer is no. If the document doesn't exist, then you don't have to produce it. Just because someone wants it doesn't mean you have it and or that you have to create it. So it's all about what you have. And as I mentioned earlier, in paper form and electronic form relating to a public purpose. Shall I continue? Exemptions from public disclosure, and there are a lot of them. I counted 22. Just going to discuss a few of them. Some obvious ones. Personnel. Needless to say that personnel files don't have to be produced, and if you have a personnel topic, you need to go undercover in a FOIA, in a executive session to discuss that appropriately. And I'll drill into that a little deeper here in a minute. In an investigatory file, you conduct an investigation of some sort, civil or criminal. That also is something that does not have to be produced. And then the one that some of you may be thinking about now, records specifically exempted by statute or common law. If you send me an email, that's privileged. It's between lawyer and client. It gets a little dicier if you sent me an email and you copied a really great constituent and supporter of yours. I don't think that's privileged anymore. Even if you're asking me legal advice, you copy your wingman from the campaign. Yeah, I think we would lose the privilege there. So that's something to be careful about.
Actually do that.
I'm sorry?
Someone actually do that?
Oh, yes.
I guess that's a dumb question.
Disregard. No, it's not a dumb question. It's a good question. I think most people don't do that, but you'd be surprised. I mean, they're so comfortable with that person, like a brother or a best friend, that they're not really thinking that if I reach out to the county attorney, maybe I should limit that to the two of us. And I think, of course, the takeaway is to do exactly that. And I'm going to roll on here. Labor negotiations or collective bargaining. When we had our multiple meetings and we worked out the contract with CWA, we didn't have to notice those meetings and invite the public. And when we got to, a critical mass and we're getting close to, getting a nice contract, we could discuss that, in executive session where we could have a robust dialogue. Another one is pending or potential litigation. So it doesn't have to be in court, but I think it's not just theoretical. I think someone probably either threatened a lawsuit or something close to that for you to rely on the pending or potential litigation. I think it really has to be potential. I think that's a low bar, but it is a bar. That's why I mention it. And then, of course, discussions in the executive session itself. Those discussions don't have to be disclosed either. And then I'll continue on. These are somewhat amusing. Emails received or sent by members of the Delaware General Assembly or their staff. Any communications between a member of the General Assembly and that member's constituent, or communications between members of the General Assembly. I guess that's an example of the golden rule. Those who have the gold make the rules. Yeah, you guys don't have that luxury. So let me back up. I mentioned earlier, emails among yourselves, communications with a constituent, right? That could easily be a public
So why hasn't
record.
that been extended to all elected officials?
That's a great question. Yeah, that would be a good one for, why not?
What code is that? You have that written down there?
Oh, it's let me see what the section is. Hang on a second. It's in FOIA 10002, paren I, and it lists, those are the exceptions. And you'll notice that Levy Court, town councils are not included in that. But remember a little while ago I said you can't caucus. So I think a member of the GA would say, well, this is kind of a logical extension of our caucusing. So we get to exempt some other things as well, not just our internal conversations, but our external ones also. But again, we don't have any of those luxuries, so we have to be a lot more careful. Now, a very important topic, of course, is the executive session itself. And I think it's really important to keep those discussions, under wraps. Don't tell your spouse about it. Don't tell anybody about it. Even if you're really annoyed by the conversation, the direction that it went, I think you could really compromise some things if those sensitive discussions got out. For example, if it's a personnel issue and there was a breach, I think that could be a violation of privacy and open up a cause of action against the county for a breach of confidentiality there. If it's an investigation that we're talking about, you could put a witness in physical harm by, breaching that, that trust level that we have to have in there when we meet. And of course, I mentioned labor situations earlier. You don't want to compromise your position by somehow letting leak out, what our bottom line is on wages, for example. That would be embarrassing and compromising and might cost the county a lot of money in the long run. Litigation, if you have a strategy, you need to keep it close to the vest. I mean, if there's a disclosure after an executive session when you've developed a fine strategy going forward and you are in Superior Court or Chancery Court, yeah, the damage could be almost incalculable there. Land acquisition, you're deciding what the bottom line is, what your final offer might look like. You don't want the other side to know that. You might be able to save $40,000 by not disclosing that, right? So it's very, very important that you don't have a lot of windows that you can maintain confidentiality, maintain privilege. And when you have those opportunities, I think you need to take them seriously and make sure that, it's like the Iron Curtain in there and that you just zip it up and don't tell a soul, no matter what, under any circumstances.
Okay,
Sir.
so we've had a lot of discussions in there, legal-wise. Those sessions are not FOIable?
No.
The public cannot FOIA what happens in executive session. Why do we record them? Why are the mics active every time we go in there?
Well, I mean, I think that's wise. I mean, who knows? That goes back a long way. I remember in the 90s, that was a while ago, they were recorded then. I mean, it's conceivable that some court someday may say that your executive session somehow doesn't qualify for the exemption that you think it does, and that you now have to disclose what happened there.
Right, but if we act on good faith now and stop recording those sessions until a judge tells us they have to be recorded, aren't we in a better position to not?
I don't know why we would. I mean, why would we stop? I mean, I'm just curious.
Why do we do it at all?
Yeah,
If
that's a good question.
it's not FOIable, why do we do it?
It goes under, like Greg said earlier, if we don't have it, we don't have to produce it.
Right.
So but if we have it recorded, then we'd have to produce it.
Right.
So.
Well, I think a court could force you to produce it, but if we got a FOIA request, the day after we have our next executive session, we don't have to cough up that tape, I can tell you that.
Well, I know on the school board that they record them also, but it's not just for recording, but it's also for checking what was said in case somebody has a question, how it was perceived, asked, they can go back to it in a body and play it back.
Yeah. It's a record, albeit a very sensitive one, a non-public record, if you will.
That, if we have it, someone who FOIA'd that information could get a sympathetic judge who says, okay, I'm going to go against the constitutional right of executive sessions to not be FOIAble, and county, you must present that tape.
Yeah, I mean, FOIA's been around a while. That's not happened yet.
Yeah.
It's theoretically possible, I suppose. Yeah, you raise a good point. But I think, to support what Mr. Angel said, I think public bodies have been recording them for a long time for the reasons that he suggested. And then I was just going to punctuate my remarks this way. The discussion's really good. There haven't really been any trailblazing judicial decisions in a while, but I was looking at a couple of Vice Chancellor Glasscock decisions, Court of Chancery, Sussex. There is a Lewis resident who has been active for a while, and he doesn't go to the AG, he goes to the Court of Chancery, and he had a beef about a dog park, and I think there was another one about construction of a windmill, and he has challenged a variety of things that the city of Lewis has done, all unsuccessfully, I might add. But nevertheless, there's a very short statute of limitations, which is good, that you have to, if you're a member of the public and you feel that there's been a FOIA violation, you have 60 days to take action after learning of it, but in no event more than 6 months after the action's been taken. So, you get, no matter what happens, you're 6 months and a day, the courthouse door slams shut. So that's probably a good thing, because you have to have finality to, governmental decision-making. You can't have challenges years later, to my mind. I think that's why it's written that way.
Yeah, great question. If you have an executive session, and obviously things there should stay in that room or supposed to stay in that room, suppose it does get out and you're able to actually pinpoint how that happened. Are there ramifications for an elected official when that happens?
Well, I think you would have to look at your own code of conduct. There aren't penalties for that in the FOIA statute. I think you'd have to look elsewhere for that answer. Okay. And I don't know, there was a claim a while back that there was a breach. I didn't really think it was a breach, so it just kind of blew over. But yeah, I think everybody has to be very circumspect when it comes to confidentiality. It's not like we do a lot of executive sessions. We only go in there, in my experience, when we absolutely have to, and we discuss things that are, well within our rights to do so in that setting. And I would just, tell commissioners just to take it very seriously, because it is. And if there is an unsuccessful court action, you can be hit with attorney's fees by the other side, which is extremely unpleasant. Now that's Town of Blades had the AG's office decided that they violated FOIA. It was really benign. It went something like this, that they were talking about Christmas bonuses, I think, and or raises. And as it turned out, they really didn't get into competencies of individual employees. And this was in the newspaper. I think they intended to, but they never really did. So they got into executive session, and it boiled down to, should we spend this money or not, right? Which things we decide all the time. So there was a deputy AG that said that probably should have been in open session. Because even though you went in there intending to discuss competencies, you never really did. So, and I think they had to do a do-over. So the next month, they did what they had done previously, awarded bonuses and/or, I think it was a Christmas bonus and maybe a raise here or there, a longevity raise, as it turned out, in open session. So it was all good. But since that was an AG's complaint and not a lawsuit, there weren't any, attorney's fees involved or anything like that. So I think it depends on where the citizen goes for his or her pound of flesh, that the stakes are a little higher in court than they are just filing a complaint with the AG's office, if that makes any sense. So that concludes my
Governed
remarks.
by our own Board of Ethics, or do we go with the state's Board of Ethics?
That's a really good question. I believe we're subject to the rules and statutes of the Public Integrity Commission.
Right. The only reason I asked, and I was going to ask you to talk about social media, because if you get on social media and start posting about results in Levy Court, you have to have 3 accounts on social media. Have your personal account, you can have a campaign account, and you need to, or you could have a elected official account. In the elected official account, you cannot deny anybody, you can't block anybody on that account. It's illegal. You can't block somebody. No matter how ignorant they get on your social media elected official account, you can't block them.
Yeah, I'm a Luddite. I don't know a damn thing about
I
social
do.
media. Although I do have a LinkedIn account, so I guess that's kind of social media, but
Yeah, we had
LinkedIn.
We had a guy.
I don't have anything else.
We had a guy last year threaten to sue me for blocking him on my campaign account.
Oh, really?
And
You got it?
he ended up not doing anything, but he threatened. He sent emails or letters to all of us saying he was going to threaten me with lawsuits, and I did a lot of research at that time. So, the other question I have is concerning serial meetings and email, or consecutively calling all the other commissioners to gain consensus on an issue.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that. I'd have to research that. I didn't come across any of that. I came across, the reply all is a problem. That should be avoided. But polling like that, that might have to be chapter 2 of this discussion.
Okay.
But I'll look into that for you.
Thanks.
So this is just chapter 1 then.
Well, I could easily create a chapter 2, but I just selected some topics that I thought were really the most important ones, and that we would start there and we would talk about preserving confidentiality and then go from there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.
I don't see how I'll research it, but if you're polling your members by calling them, how's that a public meeting?
I just know that we've had this discussion before, and it is a public meeting.
Well, it's going to turn on the facts. It depends on what the facts are. And yes, so not every single one of those would be a public meeting. I think it depends on the sequence. And I'll drill into that a little bit and find some tangible examples that we can talk about.
Thanks.
Any other questions? With that being said, did we get that one item put on executive session tonight?
And so is there an item you want to
Personnel
put on there?
issue?
Yeah, we could.
That's one to talk about, right? You're right. Right.
Hmm?
Executive.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it was noticed, right, Lori?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
So you-
Mhm.
Okay. So, going back to my earlier statement, that concludes this meeting, and we will be adjourning to executive session, which we will not be coming back here. I don't think I got one of those.
Thanks, Doc.
You bet.
Terry, I didn't get one of those. Yeah. Unless they put it on my desk someplace else. Yeah, I know.
If you can get it.
Can you take this with you? No. This one. And then there's a note for you about the tribute.
Okay, great. So I just need to sign this? Sign these? Just this one? Oh, so I signed all of those?
It's just one scale. So, that's just the last page of it.
That?
Oh, you got more?
There's one in there. Mike. Oh, crap.
I am. I'll be right there.
Bum, 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 bum.